Al-Qaeda is a threat? Yes, it is. They blow things up all the time, they kill people, but it's not state-threatening. It's unpleasant, it's tragic, but it's not state-threatening. What is state-threatening is a dispute between the Arabs and the Kurds over oil, revenue sharing, relative powers of federal government and provincial government. That is state-threatening. And the Kurds have been very aggressive, and these two little maps show how much they've taken beyond what they're supposed to have done. Now these balances have to accommodate lots of different agendas, and it will be many months before a government emerges in Iraq. Many months. I'm not going to make any forecast, even though I know it reasonably well. Let's pass on that one. Saudi Arabia, almost done now. A lot of the easy oil in Saudi Arabia has been produced. The large fields we all heard of, like Jolla and so on, discovered in the 50s, over 50 years of production, definitely halfway through their lives. So future production from Saudi Arabia depends on difficult fields, like Khurais, like Cassania, like Marjan, Manifa, and EOR in Safaniya and Gawa, which they will have to start in the next 2 years if they're going to keep production up. Well, Saudi Arabia has invested an enormous amount of money in raising its production quota. You know, it was about 8, 9, 10 million barrels a day. They've gone to 12. They're only producing 8 and a bit, so that's an investment they're not going to use yet, but it's there. And that capacity is probably going to be kept at that level for a long time. Saudi Arabia has a little bit of a problem. When the financial crisis hit and demand destruction eroded the market for them, OPEC cut production and Saudi Arabia cut as usual more than everyone else. But they can't cut much more. 8 million barrels a day is it, because they need gas for their petrochemicals, for their power generation, and they don't have enough. Twilight in the desert postponed, I call this. Saudi Arabia doesn't suddenly drop off a cliff. You know, there's plenty of oil in Saudi Arabia still, and they will maintain this plateau if they can, and they will. This man on the picture here was the man who created modern Saudi Arabia, Ibn Saud, and Abdulaziz Ibn Saud. And in the 1920s, he conquered the whole of Saudi Arabia. Otherwise, it would be, as I said, 3 countries. The things that have happened to change Saudi Arabia. First of all, in the 1950s, Nasser in Egypt clamped down on the Muslim Brotherhood because he was a socialist, he was a socialist nationalist, he didn't want any truck with these Islamists, so he started arresting them. Saudi Arabia said, well, welcome, you know, come here. And the Muslim Brotherhood took over the education system. And this is a good thing. More Islam, good. But the unfortunate consequence is education became Islamicized, heavily. The next 2 things which hit the kingdom, 1979, the Iranian Revolution. And suddenly here was right next to the custodian of the 2 holy mosques was a real Islamic country, or at least on paper, Iran. So there was a shift to encourage more religiosity in the Sunni states. And the second thing that happened in 1979 was the Grand Mosque was taken over by Salafis, fanatics, which is a huge shock to the system. You know, how did this happen? What's happening to our children? Why are they doing this? And the House of Saud was heavily shaken by this. So the reaction was, hey, we need more religion. Let's have more religion in schools. So let's take maths out, let's take physics out, let's take chemistry out, let's have more religion. And in the 80s, they had King Fahd, who was not religious at all, and wasn't interested in education either. I mean, his famous quote was, education is not as important as concrete. So let's build the university, but we won't worry about what's going on inside it. So these are the kings from Abdulaziz. The succession in Saudi Arabia is not an issue. When you read about this, then, well, you know, who's going to be king next? They know who's going to be king next. You know, it's currently Abdullah, who's an extremely good king. He'll be succeeded by Sultan, but Sultan has got colon cancer, so he may well die beforehand. If he dies, then it's Naif, and then if it's not Naif, it's Salman, and so on. So succession is not going to be an issue in Saudi Arabia. So the challenges for the state, this extremist Islamic tendency, the Muslim Brotherhood in the education, has produced a lot of unemployed young men with a righteous indignation, a grudge against the system, a grudge against the House of Saud, who they see as not Islamic, and all the hypocrisy of the system. These are the lifeblood of jihadi terrorism, if you like. This is where they come from. And we have to remember, Saudi Arabia is actually a poor country. If you go and visit Saudi Arabia, if you come from the Emirates, you realize there are people begging. There are places with no electricity, no running water. It's not like Abu Dhabi or Dubai or Kuwait. This is quite a poor country, particularly in certain rural areas. Is this a threat? Wahhabism, the old clerics are kind of dying out, unofficial Salafism is taking hold. Is this a threat to the system? Probably not. It's unpleasant, there will be terrorist activities, but it's not going to be a threat. I missed that one out. The key thing for Saudi Arabia, relationship with the US is fundamental. That's their big rock. Their deeply antagonistic relation to Iran, which is rooted in history. It's rooted in the Shia-Sunni schism we talked about. They worry about their eastern province, Shia. Are they loyal or not? And recently Abdullah just realized that they are loyal. After the first Gulf War, they all supported him. They provide most of the workers in Aramco. There's no hint that these Arab co-religionists will side with Iran rather than with their own country. Quite the opposite. I think it's a deeply conservative country, and it's going to be rather unhappy because there's all kinds of conflicts inside, but it's not going to be collapsing anytime soon. So in short, this is the last one. Global oil supply is going to be concentrated in 3 countries on the Persian Gulf: Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq, especially Iraq, where most of the increment's going to come from. And Iraq will probably displace Saudi Arabia as the swing producer in OPEC. Most of this oil is going east, and will continue to go east because that's where the market is. Within these countries, the balance between modernity and tradition, modernity and religion is still being found. They haven't come to terms with it yet. And the external players, the US and China, have a big role to play. Increasingly, China in Iran, the pariah state. For Saudi Arabia, the regime has a difficult balance between how to be modern society, but how to be traditional at the same time, how to counterbalance the Salafism among the youth, how to give them opportunities, how to reform for the liberals, how to deal with national security. A lot of things. Abdullah is doing a good job. There's no guarantees that successors will do as well. For Iran is a foreign policy challenge for all of us. How do we manage or contain the nuclear ambition without entrenching an increasingly militarized regime, which is going to become more hostile? And for Iraq's a fragile democracy which is stuck on top of some deep sectarian and ethnic divisions, which again go back centuries. Iraq is an experiment which the Iraqis will have to complete, probably with a bit of interference. I'm finished. Thank you.